Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Aging Less, the Longevity Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Marie Stella, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hello and welcome back to the show. As we age, our bodies undergo a myriad of changes and our brains are no exception. In this episode, we're delving into the fascinating world of cognitive aging, exploring the factors that influence brain health. And guiding us through this is cognitive neuroscientist Audrey Duarte. Having had long-standing and active interdisciplinary collaborations with neurologists, neuropsychologists, sleep disorder clinicians, and mechanical engineers, Audrey has a particular interest in the cognitive neuroscience of aging in racial and ethnic minorities and psychosocial factors that influence memory and underlying brain function. Her lab's work has also been featured in the Huffington Post and Science Daily, so we're incredibly fortunate to have her here with us today. Welcome to the show, Audrey.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. I'm I'm really excited to dive right in. But before we begin, how does cognitive decline differ between normal aging and neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease, for example?
Yeah, sure. In what we call cognitively unimpaired or normal aging, we all experience more frequent forgetfulness. Things like forgetting someone's name that someone you know, right? Forgetting their name maybe momentarily or remembering it later, or maybe where you park the car in the garage. Those are really common everyday memory failures. Another one would be having a word on the tip of your tongue. This is called word finding difficulty, where you just like, what is that word that means this thing? That happens to me more every day. So that's normal. And in Alzheimer's disease, which is the most common cause of dementia, it's not the only cause, but it's the most common. We and others close to us, like family, friends, will start to notice this is more frequent. It seems to progress more quickly, these kinds of memory failures. And those impairments are starting to begin are beginning to impair our daily lives. For example, going out of the house and forgetting where we were going, going to the store and realizing we don't know what we're meant to get there or what we need, getting lost more often, which is not previously our custom, let's say. And importantly, these memory failures progress somewhat quickly over a period of, let's say, months. So that would be what we would call like more possibly early signs of dementia.
Yeah. I'm not sure if this is a cause for concern, but with what you mentioned with normal aging, the everyday forgetfulness thing, it's something that I do experience. I don't know if this is something to be concerned about at my age.
Uh, no, I mean, yeah. So I think most of these memory failures, they happen to all of us multiple times a week, maybe every day. It's when they start to really impair your daily functioning, right? Your ability to work, pay your bills, to do your, if you're, if you're at school or something, or maybe you're getting lost in a conversation that you're having and you don't remember what you were just talking about. Um, that would be clear to people around you, right? But if you're having a momentary lapse of what's that word that I wanted to come up with just now, or oh, what is that person's name? I mean, that is very, very common and not a cause for concern.
Okay, that is music to my ears. But before we go further into detail about this,
Yeah.
how would you describe the importance of cognitive aging awareness?
Yeah, I think, um, this is what I do in my research in my lab. We study cognitive aging, primarily cognitively unimpaired aging, which I was talking about. So I think in terms of awareness, everybody's very concerned about Alzheimer's disease. And so most of the people that we interact with on a daily basis in our research are concerned and wondering if these memory failures that they experience mean that they have early signs of dementia, or that means that they're going to develop dementia or something. And most of the time, almost always, honestly, it's the answer is no, or this is normal. And so I think making people aware that in cognitively what we call normal or unimpaired aging, there are still impairments, right? It's that's normal. And we do experience more of them as we age. And that's something for us to be aware of. That's just normal part of the aging process. And we'll get into probably some of the in this podcast talking about some of the underlying reasons for that, like what's going on in the brain. But it is true that as we get older, we are at a greater risk of developing neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's and other causes of dementia. And that's something for us to be aware of too. And so when I talk with people, I tell them, a lot of what you're experiencing is just normal and not to worry. It's when you and those around you start to notice maybe this is getting progressively worse quickly, and things that you used to be able to do, let's say a few months ago, you're not able to do. It's quite dramatic, perhaps sometimes. Um, that is something to be aware of as well.
Yeah, well, that's a great introduction to our topic for today. But before we go further into detail, I'd love to get to know you better. So, this is Have You Met Audrey? And my first question for you is, what is your favorite book?
So I don't have a single favorite book. Just there's so many wonderful books. I think the author who I most look forward to reading is Donna Tartt. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she's an American writer, and she writes a book kind of thriller mystery type books, but she writes one something like every 10 years. So it's really exciting when one comes out. But um I guess most consistently I probably read just fantasy genre. I like an escape. Every day I'm pretty much reading some fantasy novel by some writer. Yeah.
Yeah, I really do understand. I've always loved fantasy so much, and it really gets a bad rap, I feel like, in the book world. I always felt like fantasy books were looked as not true literature or something.
Yeah. I mean, I thought silly. I couldn't write a fantasy novel, right? To create these
Yeah,
worlds and languages and all of these creatures and things. I find it really it's a good time. Like
a
I
hundred
just like to
percent.
be entertained.
Yes, and I feel
Yeah.
like there's so much that goes into the world of a fantasy novel, especially when it's built really well. There's so many parts to it. There's the language side to it. There's the like just the mannerisms and the different ethnicities or races in the world, and the politics that happen in the world as well.
Totally. I agree completely. And I read a lot of feminist sort of fantasy novels where there are these really strong, women characters that are, maybe they're elves or whatever. But yeah, exactly as you say, it's sort of like in many ways, they can have this ideal world that may not be what we have. And so it is yeah, a fantasy, I guess, but it's a nice
Yeah.
escape.
Yeah, no, but at the same time, there's so many parallels that we can draw from like fantasy politics to real world politics. I love that you can choose to look at it from pure escapism, but you can also choose to apply it to real life and learn
Yeah.
lessons from it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I agree with that. Fantasy, one of my favorite genres ever.
Yeah.
But aside from fantasy books, what movies do you enjoy watching?
Oh, I love movies. I was thinking about, okay, so what movies do I enjoy? I think this year I was thinking about movies that I've seen, and we were just talking about it in my house as we saw it this year, and it's relevant to this podcast. There's this film called Thelma, and it's so good. So the premise of this film is it's an older woman, and she's maybe, oh gosh, in her 80s, maybe even older, and she's at this stage in her life, and this is a fiction film, where her family is worrying about her ability to live independently. And she falls prey to a scam, which targets older people. And this is a real thing that happens in the real world where older people are targets of scams to take money from them. And she does, so she falls prey to the scam, but she decides to go on a mission to get her money back. And it is so good. It's funny and emotional, and it's really, really smart. It's just wonderful. I love the message of it too. And my whole family saw it. So it was like a multi generational sort of outing. My mother, who's in her 70s, my kids, and everyone loved it. It was just so heartwarming and great. And just, yeah, recommend it highly.
Yeah, that sounds like a fantastic pick. I'm always on the lookout for new movies to watch, so that's definitely going on my watch list.
It's
And thank you
great.
for the recommendation. Now, aside from that, are you listening to any
Yeah.
podcasts at the moment?
Yeah, I think I listen to quite a few. And one I like a lot, I listen to in the car on my way to work and to drop off one of my kids at school. It's called Stuff You Should Know. And it's an American show with uh, these two guys who are just really down to earth and really well informed, non-judgmental, and they just in amusing ways tell you about how things work. And that's essentially the premise of the show. So there might be an episode on hummingbirds, or there might be an episode on the history of Halloween, or some battle or something. And it's just any topic you can possibly imagine. And it's just so I feel like I'm being educated, but in a very interesting, entertaining way. They're making jokes, but it's just because they're naturally funny, not because they're trying to do bits or anything. It's really a good one. And everyone can listen to it. So it's kid friendly too.
Yeah, I love that. I've been really, really loving how much edutainment has risen over the last few years.
Yeah.
It's amazing what you can do when you have a few laughs and you learn at the same time. It you know. Sometimes you need to de-stress, but it also makes you feel good to learn. But reading text all the time just sometimes isn't the best. Our eyes need to take a break, and um, yeah, so some of our jobs require a lot of reading as it is. So love that recommendation. Now my next question for you is there anyone that you look up to in your life, either professionally or personally?
Sure. So many. My parents, yeah. And I think and just because of how wonderful they are and how lovely what good parents they are. A few women in my, like, senior women in my academic field who've helped lift up others, aspiring women scientists. That really made an impact on me. Just seeing that they were doing the work and being open and inclusive and kind and encouraging, and that was really helpful. And people I meet from time to time who devote their lives to the service of others, I find that very just inspiring, and I want to be more like that. So, yeah, I guess just
Yeah.
quite a few people.
Yeah, for sure. And what traits do you tend to find particularly admirable?
I really, maybe this seems even more relevant now with just there can be a lot of vitriol online, and I'm not really active on social media a bit, but I find that can be a place that can get out of hand pretty quickly. I like people who are kind and generous and just positive. I think, especially as I get older, I just want to spend my time with people who are that way. And so I'm really inspired by traits like that. Just basic things, kindness, generosity, treating others well.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you there. I feel like sometimes when scrolling on social media after just like 10 minutes, I can get so stressed out because I'm seeing all, well, maybe it's my fault because I see like brief interactions and then I expand the threads and then I read all the way and I go like, oh my gosh, this is so much drama and I don't like it. And sometimes it's just like people can be really condescending, you know, and I just don't like that. I don't know why people feel the need to be like that on social media, even if they are like factually correct, you know.
I
But the
don't
worst is
either. I really
yeah,
don't.
yeah, I know. Um anyway, to more lighthearted stuff. What course have you taken or what class have you taken in your lifetime that has stuck with you to this date?
Mm, I have been lucky. I think I've had a lot of really wonderful teachers, instructors throughout all my schooling. I know that I've been lucky in that way. So I I'll just say something about myself. So um, when I was in college, I changed my major something like 3 times minimum, and it was because I think I had such great teachers that I was inspired by teachers who were teaching. Like cultural anthropology was my first major, and then I was really into I always like science, I guess. So I those are the courses I gravitated to the most, and I wanted to be a writer at one point, and so I think my one of my majors was English. I had wonderful writing English teachers in school, so I eventually settled on neuroscience, and that stuck. But yeah, I think you can really get interested in about any topic, just about any topic, when you have a wonderful instructor. I've found that to be true for myself anyway, many times. Even topics that I thought I wouldn't be interested in, I've got like organic chemistry. I had a wonderful organic chemistry teacher, and people typically don't enjoy that course. So it's like a common one, but I had a great teacher and I was really into it. So I think the instructor makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And your majors are quite far apart from what you do now. But has there been anything that you learnt from the majors that you picked in the past and you found to be applicable to what you do now?
Yeah, I think so. Like I still love English. I mean, I read a lot and I write every day for my a big part of what I do for work. You know, we do science, of course, but we write up our science. And so we write all the time. We're trying to convey it's not creative writings per se, but it is writing. And so I'm using a lot of the skills that I developed in English. And cultural anthropology, that does come up sometimes because some of the courses that I teach to my students are about things like how drugs work on the brain, in the brain. And I talk about the history of drug use in indigenous cultures, things like, you know, for example, ayahuasca in South America. And so that is very anthropological. So I find that yeah, I guess that's, yes. To
Yeah,
answer your question, those previous majors do come up.
yeah, that's really interesting. I imagine the writing one to be really useful as well because it's not like I do read all of these papers in depth or anything, but I do like look through them sometimes for the research for the podcasts. And it does impress me thoroughly how many scientists have the pen skills to convey the importance of whatever they're trying to like their study, for example, or the research. And I feel like that's not really, maybe because I'm not really in the science world, but I've not really heard anyone talk about the penmanship that you need to be a scientist.
So absolutely. Yeah. I think you can be an amazing scientist. And I've worked with a lot of people. I'm not going to point anyone out, but, people vary a lot in their ability to convey information. And that is something we work on a lot. So with my lab, with my, the scientists who work with me, something we do spend a lot of time on is writing. So they might present something to me, and I might help offer some feedback. And yeah, I enjoy writing a lot. And yeah, you really have to be able to convey information in a way that's clear. So, for example, Marie, you're reading it and you say that science is not your world, but you have to read science in order to do your job sometimes. And if people have written it in a way that's only interpretable to other scientists, they haven't done a great job, right? So, you want the work to be read widely, and so it's important to be able to write that way.
Yeah, yeah. That's what I always find impressive when I find a paper that manages to do that, because it's not, I can't imagine it to be easy. You're watering down a lot. I mean, I wouldn't call it watering down maybe, but you're making it really concise. And I find it very difficult to be concise in everyday life, like I feel the need to give the entire backstory. And so piecing that all together sounds like it's a lot of work,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll just say one little anecdote, or not, it's not an anecdote, but when I'm working with or just anyone, when I'm working with students and they're giving a presentation or something and we're practicing, I always, I say the same, somebody must have said this to me and I wish I remembered who it was, but I always tell them, explain this to me like you're explaining it to your grandmother, your grandparents. Because if you can do that, you have given a big picture sort of representation of what your work is. And now you can get more into the details a little bit, but you have to start with that big picture. And if you can't do that, it's going to be hard for you to grab people, even someone who knows the science. You're not going to be able to grab the public. You're not going to be able to grab your audience wherever you're talking. So it's important to be able to hopefully I can do that well today. But that's something we do work on.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. I feel like I got to know you a bit better. So let's move on to the interview section. For starters, how would you define longevity?
I would say I would define longevity as living into older years, feeling physically, cognitively, emotionally well for as many of those years as possible.
Mhm. And what is cognitive aging?
So in research and in the literature that we write and read, we define it as a process of change, both decline but also increases. Not all changes decline in our cognition, including long-term memory, short-term memory, attention, something called executive functioning, which is sort of high order thinking, planning, complex activities, tasks, switching between tasks, that's executive functioning, language over many years. So this change happens over many years and usually following our, let's say, early 20s or so after our brains are fully developed. So cognitive aging is a long process.
Oh, that gave me a fright because my early 20s have passed me and I didn't realize it started this early. I,
Oh, yes.
yeah. Oh, gosh. From your knowledge, do people generally know that cognitive aging declines past early 20s?
I don't think so. I think when you think about aging, we tend to think of something, well, older than us, right? So it's all relative. But yeah, no, I mean, if we look at the maturation of the brain and changes in volume, those changes in volume start, can be mid late 20s. I mean, quite early, but it's a very gradual process. This change across the lifespan and very very subtle, right? So this is on average across people. We really don't have, I'll say this here, so we don't have data on single individuals that we track over every year for their life. That sort of data just doesn't exist in cognitive aging. We have data over maybe 5 years, 10 years, maybe even a bit more, but not a whole lifetime. So we don't know how gradual it is for each individual, but it's probably quite gradual.
Right. And what do you know about how the brain structure and function changes as we age?
So many things change. Structurally, we can see slow and steady reductions in what's called gray matter volume. Probably people have heard of gray matter and white matter. Gray matter is what is on the outside. So if you just look at a brain, that's gray matter, what you see. That change is the most dramatic, I shouldn't say dramatic, the largest in the frontal lobe of the brain, like right here. And it also occurs in other areas too. But there's a reduction also in white matter. And white matter represents it's underneath the gray matter, but it represents the connections between all areas of the brain. And these connections, or these changes, I should say, brain white matter changes, they're visible to the naked eye. So you can just see them with your eye. Functionally, there are reductions in metabolic activity, blood flow throughout the brain, and neurons, which are nerve cells, which are the functional cells of the brain. They don't die usually with just in normal aging, but they do shrink. So some of those we need sort of microscopic methods or brain imaging methods to see, but some you could see in a post mortem, you could see with a naked eye.
Right. And there are several individual differences to this. So, what factors contribute to that?
Literally more than I can say. So, importantly, there's no single factor. Factors that have been most well studied include health factors like diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, high blood pressure, physical activity. These are more positive activities like exercise, sleep quality, stress. And there are some genetic factors, though there are numerous genes involved in aging. There's no single aging gene.
Right. So from what I'm hearing, it sounds like it's really difficult to pinpoint exactly what any given individual should be doing for their cognitive health.
I'd say that's correct. I mean, I think there are factors, and we can talk about this now. There are factors that do have what we might say in science lingo is explain much of the variance. So the outcome being cognitive aging, cognitive health, and which factors seem to be most related to that outcome. Physical activity is a big one. Uh, the ones that I mentioned are the big ones, but
Yeah.
there could be many that we haven't even explored yet. And in a way, this could be overwhelming, but it's also great because it means there's many places where you can tweak things, right, to improve cognitive and health outcomes.
Yeah, 100%. And most are also more concerned with the negative aspects of cognitive aging. I mean, I think everyone saw and heard my shock when I heard that cognitive decline started from early 20s. Um, but what are the more positive aspects to this?
I'm really glad you asked this because there's so many positive aspects of aging, and I don't think that's the stereotype, right? I think the stereotype is what do we think about when we think about aging? I ask people this in my classes, what do you think? And they say things like, uh, well, weak or slow and it's never positive, right? It's usually not positive, but there are many positive aspects of aging. So, for example, we tend to find in research that emotional well-being increases as we age. We tend to have more positive emotions and experience less stress and fear of uncertainty. We show improvements in our language abilities and knowledge um, as we age. For example, older people on cognitive tests that we will do in the lab, they almost always show richer vocabularies and factual knowledge. They know more things, and their vocabularies are much more elaborate than do younger people. And same as for the negative aspects of aging, these are generalities, but we're all different, and many individual differences here too.
Yeah. And you mentioned before that genetics does play a part in cognitive aging as well. Could you elaborate on that? In what ways does it contribute?
Yeah. So I will say there is no single aging gene in humans. We don't, and we also don't know much about the genetics of human aging just generally. But from research in non humans, a lot of genetic research focuses on, people might know this or may not, on fruit flies, actually. They're a very well studied model for understanding genetics, and mice too. We know that lifespan is somewhat determined by genetics, and there are particular genes that have been identified, at least in those models of non-human models. We know that longevity does seem to run at least partially in families, which could indicate a genetic component of at least lifespan. There are some well-known genes, one called ApoE, that's associated with an increased risk of Alzheimer's disease. So not cognitive aging per se, but Alzheimer's disease. And there are other dementias that have, there are a few genes that have been implicated. But importantly, for most of those, uh, having a form of that gene that is associated with a higher risk of Alzheimer's disease does not mean you will develop Alzheimer's disease necessarily. So it's not, 100% risk factor or something.
Yeah. I think there's also, I mean, not we're not necessarily covering Alzheimer's disease in
Yeah.
this episode because it's more about cognitive unimpaired decline, but there's also a stereotype there about Alzheimer's disease being like once you get it, your life is ended basically. How like what are your thoughts on that?
So, Alzheimer's disease is neurodegenerative disease, which means what it sounds like. It there is degeneration over time, in neural integrity of the brain, and with that comes decline over time in cognition. And unfortunately, there is no cure for that. So, we've come a long way in understanding of all of the causes of Alzheimer's disease, but there is no single cause, making it very difficult to treat. Um, so it is tough because it's, nobody wants to be diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease or wants their family member to, because we don't have a cure for it, and people will decline. Like, that is 100% going to happen. So it is tough, but people can live for a long time, and it isn't like they overnight sort of change and they're not grandma anymore. Or, that can be a very slow process, but it is tough. It is a tough
Yeah.
one.
For sure. I think that just helps to paint the picture a little bit, the difference between a neurodegenerative disease versus just regular cognitive aging as well. But you mentioned that a lot of lifestyle factors like physical activity do play a role, although it's hard to tell exactly what and to what extent. But could you go further into detail as to what we know so far about these various factors?
Sure. So I like to focus on these factors more than genetics in my own research, because we can better control these factors, and it's nice to be able to do something, right? Uh, so there's no, for example, okay, so things that have been explored a lot would be, diet, physical activity, sleep. These are all things that we explore in my own research. Diet is one that people have studied a lot. So there is no single diet that seems to be the best. And many listeners will know this, or viewers, I guess. But a diet low in processed foods, animal products, one that's high in legumes, beans, colorful vegetables and fruits, and healthy unprocessed grains like oats, rice, barley, and lots of water seem to be good. So, kind of common sense things. I think we know that good diet is good for your body, it's good for your brain too, and very likely your cognitive aging. Sleep is something we study a lot in my lab. And um, we study it so much that I sometimes forget that not everyone knows how important sleep really is, but it's hugely important. So I will say there are huge individual differences here in how much people sleep and when they sleep. However, from our work and the work of others, we've shown that a regular and consistent sleep pattern is best to the extent that you can achieve that. Consistently sleeping less than 4 or 5 hours or more than 9 hours seem to be linked to worse health and cognition, actually. Variable sleep patterns seem to be linked to poor cognition too. So 4 hours one night, 9 hours the next, that sort of thing can be that variability is not the best. No one likes to hear this, but when I give talks out in the world, but physical activity is really important, and it's strongly associated with health and cognition and lower risk of Alzheimer's disease. So, what I like to tell people though is, when you think exercise, I mean, even me, what pops into my head is something like running. But I don't love running. It's not my favorite activity, but many activities count as physical activity. So, dancing, yard work, cleaning the house, walking, cycling, swimming, yoga, all of these have been shown to be beneficial. So, just moving your body in this way, in all of these, even breathing, mindfulness, kind of meditation, really beneficial. So, maybe that helps people a little bit more because they probably do one or more of those activities. Um, I also want to make clear that you know that we who's in cognitive aging, particularly those of us who study people from minoritized groups or people who are lower socioeconomic um, levels, understand that it's really a luxury to be able to sleep well, to be able to find the time to exercise. And we recognize not everyone has that. So I would never want anyone to feel judged for not being able to live this way, because it is a luxury if you can achieve that great sleep every night and great diet and exercise. I want to make clear that I understand that.
Yeah, 100%. And I think another part to it is, I mean, you know, as teenagers, I feel like a lot of people kind of um make fun of those kids who sleep consistent regular schedule, like an 8 hour sleep instead of going to bed at 12 a.m. I remember I got a lot of flack for it in school. So what role do you think education plays in all of this as well?
So, educating people about the importance of sleep, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's huge. When I was in school, we definitely never thought about sleep, and my personal experience too. Maybe this might just be my own experience, but I've talked to other students, and they've said similar things. So I come from a Mexican immigrant family, and sleep was kind of seen as a like you have to work, right? Like that was a luxury, and no, it definitely wasn't valued. What was valued was hard work, doing well in school, and getting and so I think a lot of people experience that same feeling and not really understanding how important sleep actually is. I have teenagers too, and they also, and this is what I do for a living, and so it's quite frustrating for me that they don't always appreciate the importance of sleep and stay up too late, and wake up too early because they have to go to school. But yeah, I think education is hugely important. I did this really. I just thought of this. I remember this. I was teaching this summer school program in China over the summer, and I was talking about sleep and the importance of sleep, and I let everybody sleep in the class. Like we took a little break, and everyone was given the opportunity to sleep, and like half of the students fell asleep, and it was only 10 minutes or something. But I think little activities like that are fun and also beneficial. And yeah, I talk about sleep a lot, as you could see. I'm really into it. I could do this whole podcast just about sleep, but
Yeah, a nice little power nap. I wish I had that in my classes. The next question I wanted to ask was, the phrase, the saying of like better late than never. How applicable is it in cognitive decline, and as in the sense of like um starting to be concerned with the lifestyle factors and starting physical activity and starting regular sleep schedules. Yeah, how applicable is it?
That's a great question. So I will say, so I think what the data that would speak the best to that would be intervention studies. So there are many intervention studies where, and what that is you have participants enroll in your study, and you have some participants in a, let's say it's an exercise intervention, or maybe it's a diet intervention or sleep intervention, although I would say there are fewer of those. Most of them have focused on exercise, various kinds. You have people enroll, and they're either in the exercise group or they're in some other passive activity group, perhaps, or different kinds of exercises. And those people that are enrolled in those studies are typically middle aged or older, and sedentary, largely sedentary, so not doing much physical activity. And those data are very compelling. So they show, for example, increases in brain volume, increases in metabolic and functional, just functional activity in the brain, and also increases in cognition. And so these are people who have not typically exercising for maybe a few months, a couple of times, a few times a week. And sometimes this exercise is like yoga, right? It's not,
Mhm,
or Tai Chi or something.
mhm.
So, yes, this whole idea of like better late than never definitely applies. And to these, yes, at any age, you can change things.
Yeah, yeah, but I assume it's still good to start early if you can.
Probably, and the thing is, have some data, like which require to know that to answer to that question. What we need to know is, what was your diet? Let's say it's diet. Like, what was your diet like when you were in your child, in your 20s and your 30s, and you kind of understand something about a person throughout their life. And I would predict, I think we probably would, that people who've had these kind of consistently, great diets, physical activity, great sleep, whatever, are those that age best, cognitively speaking. We just don't know the answer to that question because we just don't have that data. We don't have very much of that data out there in research yet.
Yeah, and another thing that I've seen a lot when reading about neuroscience and brain
Mhm.
function and all that kind of stuff is inflammation. What is inflammation and what's its role in age-related cognitive decline?
So that's a great question. So inflammation is a normal immune response in the body. We all experience it. So if you are injured, you cut yourself or something, and if you can feel a wound is kind of warm to the touch during that healing process, that's inflammation, right? So the
Mhm,
swelling, blood flow to a wounded area, that happens where we can see it. It also happens inside our bodies. And normal, right? It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing to have inflammation. However, as we age, and there's also inflammation in the brain, but as we age, there is a change in the anti-inflammatory response, for many complex reasons that we still don't fully understand. But that seems to be a normal thing that happens as we age as well. So there is inflammation, but there's also an anti-inflammatory response, and that anti-inflammatory response is reduced. Now, what may happen is we get too much inflammation, and we can measure this in different ways, with what are called biomarkers from the blood. You can measure these measures of inflammation. And it does seem to be that some inflammation in the brain is associated with worse cognitive outcomes and predicts cognitive decline, and maybe Alzheimer's disease or other dementias. That is a relatively newer area of work. I mean, not that new, but so we're still learning about that. But yes, so inflammation can be a predictor of cognitive decline. Yes.
Okay, that's really interesting. And what types of memory are most affected by aging?
Memory? Oh, this is what we study in my lab. Primarily, we study memory. So, the type of memory that is most affected by aging is what's called episodic memory. And this is memory for personally experienced, it's long term memory for personally experienced events. So, if I ask you, Marie, about, what would you do for dinner last night? You can answer if you want.
I'm trying to think. I actually don't recall. Oh yes, I remember now. I had this like sushi bowl situation, just like salmon with mayonnaise and soy sauce and sriracha mixed with sushi rice and then some seaweed.
There you go. Okay, that sounds very healthy, full of omegas. Very good. Do you remember who you were with?
I think I got hungry before my partner got home, so I ate first. And so I was alone with my cat.
Okay, so that's pretty good. And you remember about what time that was because it was before your partner was home, right?
I believe for 5:45 p.m. around there.
Oh, very good. Okay, so very good episodic memory. You've got to you remember the what, like what did you eat, where you were, who you were with. In this case, cat. About what time, and that's a great example of an episodic memory. So as we get older, we don't have just amnesia for the fact that we had dinner last night or maybe even what we ate, but it becomes more difficult to remember the specific details like time, place, setting sometimes. And that's typical. So we see that in cognitively unimpaired aging. And that type of memory, episodic memory, is also the impairments in episodic memory are also the hallmark of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. It's just much more severe and just more noticeable.
Right. And is there any way to improve or maintain our episodic memory as we age?
Um, that's a great question. So I think there are many things we can do, and it's all of the factors that essentially that I've been talking about. You know, there are all of these. Maybe your people who are listening or watching have heard about like brain training games. There are loads of these crossword puzzles, that sort of thing, and people ask me about them a lot. And the truth to those is that there isn't super strong support for brain training games or crosswords or whatever as buffering against cognitive decline or preventing Alzheimer's disease or anything like that. I mean, you will likely get better at playing those games or your crosswords or whatever, but your improvements don't transfer to other tasks like memory tasks. But if they're fun, wonderful. You should do the things that are fun because enjoying yourself is associated with good cognition overall. So being like, having good well-being. Those factors I mentioned before, the lifestyle factors, things like physical activity, sleep, are probably what I would focus on because people who engage in more of those healthy activities do tend to have better cognition in episodic memory, but other aspects of cognition as well.
Right. I love that you addressed the brain training games because they're really popular on the app stores at the moment, and I always wondered what basis there was for it or what research there was for these brain training games actually training your brain and to what extent. But yeah, crossword puzzles and Sudoku are also pretty popular in terms of their so-called brain training features, but
Yeah.
and I always found it fun, but I like after a while would get my eyes really tired out and my brain would actually hurt I once slept after playing Sudoku for hours and dreamt of numbers, just numbers. So I don't know if that actually would work for improving my brain function or just give me nightmares.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I can say about the brain training games. So a lot of people do like them, and I've given talks at many senior centers. I'm sure they're all over, right? Where people like retirement homes where people live, and or community centers, and they all have them on the computer, and they always ask about them. And I say, "Do you enjoy them?" If they do, great. Then that's an enjoyable activity that you're engaging in. But if it's something that a person is doing because they think this is the cure, right? Or this is the number one thing that they could be spending their time and money doing to have better cognition, prevent cognitive decline or Alzheimer's disease, that's definitely not the case. And so one of the companies, at least one of them, actually had was sued because some of the claims were like that, and they had to change their marketing because they were really making false claims about the benefits of their products. So I don't want people to spend money on something if they feel like this is going to give them some benefits. Is actually there isn't data to suggest that it would. But if it's something you enjoy, yes, you should absolutely spend time doing that.
Yeah, and speaking of enjoyable activities, I've had conversations with other people in the neuroscience field, and they always say that with executive function or working memory, it's good to engage with hobbies that you enjoy. So what is your take on that?
Absolutely correct. When we enjoy an activity, and there's interest, there's some studies on this too, and it's not the kind of research I do, but there are lower levels of stress. And stress promotes inflammation, which we already talked about being negative. Lowers our heart rate, releases oxytocin sometimes, which also can have some cognitive benefits. Some research is showing. So if you're enjoying yourself, that is a stress relieving activity. And yes, you should absolutely do that. Yeah. So, whatever those hobbies are that you love, go for it.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And my last few questions for you, I wanted to get more into the executive function part of cognitive
Sure.
decline. So, can you tell us more about to what extent our executive function declines with age? Is it just as gradual as the general cognitive decline? What are the little implications that come along with it?
Sure. So, executive functioning declines a lot. And we likely notice this even in our 30s, 40s. I mean, I certainly do. I'm 48. Memory, episodic memory, as I was talking about before, and executive functioning are actually very related. So, the kinds of memory impairments that are typical in aging, like forgetting where we parked the car in the lot today, or uh, forgetting, did I take my medication this morning, or because you did it yesterday, or are you conflating it with that day? Um, those kinds of memory impairments are likely related to executive functioning. So we need to be able to, for example, okay. So for example, I'm talking about myself here. So I park in the same parking lot every day at work. But depending on what time I get there, I don't always get to park in the same spot or the same area of the parking lot, right? It might be full, or maybe it's not full and I park at a lower level. If I go to my garage at the end of the day and I try to find my car, I'm going to go to if I'm not thinking, right, I'm going to go to my default area of the parking garage. And then if my car's not there, I have to remember, okay, wait, inhibit these these memories of where I usually park my car, this very familiar memory, inhibit that to try to retrieve the updated location of the lot. I think we've all had this experience probably. And that is executive functioning, right? Like you're inhibiting what's not relevant right now, which is where you usually park the car, and trying to recover this memory of where you parked today. And so that's kind of represents an interplay between executive functioning and episodic memory. So executive functioning, in fact, in research that we've done in my lab and other groups too, we've shown that memory impairments in aging, when they're observed in cognitively unimpaired aging, normal aging, are it's most often when executive functioning is necessary. That kind of memory would be a perfect example of the parking the lot or the forgetting you took your medication this morning. Um, yeah, so executive functioning does decline quite a lot. And yeah.
Yeah, wow. Having a car at that point seems like a huge responsibility. It sounds like a huge responsibility now, in my current um extent or degree of executive functioning. Like one time my friend and I went to a shopping mall, and well, she was driving and she parked the car somewhere, and I just kind of like tried to remember the numbers on the pillar. Don't know why it didn't strike me to like take a photo of it, because now we have these things called phones with cameras on them. But I didn't, and then I completely forgot where it was. But worst thing was that the owner of the car herself didn't remember where we came from. So we were just stuck there, and we had to kind of just like go around the car park, like clicking the button. Um, yeah. So it helps to know that it's likely not going to improve with age, and maybe this will put me off from getting a car.
Cars are bad news. Yeah, I just had a car accident a few weeks ago. Actually, it's not my fault, but yeah, I've ever since then I've thought these are just more trouble than they're worth. I wish I could just walk everywhere.
Yeah. Are you okay?
Oh yeah, yeah. It was luckily not injured. You know, nobody was injured, but just a bummer.
Yeah, that's good, but that must have been traumatizing to some extent.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was a little. Yeah, it's never fun to be in a car accident. I have not been in one before, so that was an experience. But I was, I was just thankful that the car was damaged and it'll be fixed. It's tomorrow's fix. It's going to pick it up actually. But my mom was in the car with me, and she's older, and she was sitting on the side that was hit. So I was really grateful that she was not injured at all. In fact, I think I was more sort of stiff than she was. But anyway,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, you seem to be handling it pretty well for someone who just got into a car accident. Um, but now let's move on to the practices and habits section.
Yeah.
What is a habit that you would recommend practicing to maintain our cognitive health?
There's no single thing. Um, so, I don't want to just keep repeating myself, but in terms of habits, I think um, like good sleep, if that can be a habit, which is hard. I mean, it's
Hmm.
a real problem, be getting enough sleep,
Hmm.
getting quality sleep.
Yeah.
But a lot for me, especially because I think when I started researching sleep more, I started to become more and more aware of it and the routine. And we study things. Um, Sleep hygiene is what we call it, or sleep habits. Same thing, different word for the same thing. But essentially, what's your routine around sleep? And I have made a very I don't want to say strict or rigid, but I have a ritual around my whole like sleep routine, and I'm really into it. I'll just say what I do
Yeah.
for myself. So my part of my and this is related to reducing stress, getting enough sleep, and waking up at the same time every day, more or less. So I really like my nighttime ritual, which is I write out all the things that I need to do the following day, so they're out of my head before I go to bed, because there's a lot of evidence suggesting that stress around bed or in while you're in bed is strongly associated with poor sleep. People probably experience that anecdotally, but there's data to suggest that is actually true. So um, I have found for myself, if I can write out all of my worries or the things that, particularly the things that I need to do over the next day or maybe 2 days, that really helps me. I say goodnight to all the people in my house, and I try to do this around the same time every day. That's another big one. I say goodnight to my pets. I get myself ready for bed. I do not keep my phone in my room. So there's a lot of research on phones being, and I don't mean just screens, but phones in particular, because we are really drawn to them for email, for texts, for social media, whatever. And especially if they have a ring, some alerting that you've gotten a new text or a new message or something, that is extremely distracting. And even if it's not alerting you, there's research showing that if it's even in your proximity, you're more likely to pick it up, and you think about it more than if it's in another room. So I don't keep it in my room. I read a little bit with the lights low on my e-reader, and I do this more or less the same time every night. I go to bed very quickly, fall asleep very quickly. I wake up more or less the same time every day and take care of my pets, do a little bit of yoga if I am, sometimes 5 minutes, sometimes 30 minutes if I have time. And I finish my get ready routine. And sometimes I'll do a little bit of emailing while I'm having coffee. And I have it down at this point. So, yeah, that's kind of what I do for myself.
I really like that you have such a compact nighttime ritual. What I like to do as well, to get things out of the way, is I like to pack my bag the night before so I don't have to think about it in the morning. And I think like as when I was younger, I used to think like, oh, nighttime rituals are so boring and I can't like really adhere to them very well. I still, believe me, I still am not the best at adhering to a nighttime ritual. But it is nice to have somewhat of a system in place just to pack things up for the night and head to bed. It feels like I'm putting in more care into my day as well. So not just for, the sake of my cognitive function through my lifetime, but just, it kind of feels like I'm giving gratitude to the day, which I know sounds a bit like, spiritual and I don't know. I think it can come off as like, oh, that's too, um, well, too touchy feely and too emotional or something. But genuinely, I just think it's nice to pack everything up and to yeah, make sure that everything's good to go for the next morning, so you're not in chaos constantly. But what are some of the challenges that you experienced yourself in um, building and maintaining a nightly ritual like this?
Um, oh, well, sometimes, if well, I was just traveling as an example. So anytime you're traveling, that can be really hard to maintain routines and what you eat and time you go to bed, and your sleep environment's weird. And so, of course, it threw everything out the window. So I think I do feel a little bit worse actually after coming back from that trip. Even though it's quite fun to go away sometimes. So yeah. Um, and so sometimes for whatever, maybe I have to stay up to finish something for work. I have a deadline, a grant is due, that kind of thing. If I don't get enough sleep the night before, then I don't feel well rested enough to wake up at my early enough time to do my yoga, and it kind of throws everything off. I definitely don't feel as well, or if the weather's bad, I can't walk the dogs early, and that throws off the routine. So yeah, just normal stuff. Or sometimes I'm just, I mean, I'm a human too, so I'm sensitive to stress, and yeah, there have been stressful things happening in the world, and sometimes that creeps in there when you're trying to sleep, and it's tough. But I try to practice breathing. Mindfulness is helpful for me. I'm not very good at it, but I try it, and that can help me wind down.
Yeah, 100%. I think the best policy is just, doing what you can and remembering it's not about perfectionism or doing it to a T. It's more about doing what you can to maintain your cognitive function. If you lose a sleep for a night, lose a sleep lose sleep for a night, in the long run it's not the worst thing in the world, like you're, yeah. So thank you very much for sharing all of that with us. I feel like I'm a little bit, I wouldn't say a little bit, I'm substantially more educated on this topic now, and it's all thanks to you. So thank you once again for coming on the podcast. Now let's move on to the open mic section. This is your opportunity to talk about anything that you're passionate about, and it doesn't have to be related to the topic. So the floor is entirely yours. Please take it away.
um, oh gosh, I mean, I like so many things. I think probably people would say that know me that I'm quite passionate about is I really love animals. So I love them so much. So I have quite a few pets, dogs and a cat. But my family and I volunteered at animal shelters in all the cities that we've lived in, and we just love that. I mean, it's just a nice way to, I mean, there's physical labor involved, so that feels quite good and therapeutic. And then there's um, interacting with all of these animals that just need love and attention. And um, so the only downside of doing this is that you might end up with a lot of animals that you take home, which I certainly have because I just can't not. But they bring us so much joy. So yeah, it does add a lot of complexity to our lives, right? They throw off my morning routine or whatever. But there is research. I remember this too. So there is a lot of research on um, things like petting your animals, your pets, can lower stress, lower your blood pressure, and it's good for them and it's good for us, and so everybody wins. So I guess I would say animals are one of my passions.
Yeah, I love that. I 100% agree. I feel like it's I mean, I haven't volunteered in any animal shelters. I think I did like once, but that was a stint and I wouldn't really count it as significant experience. Anyway, I'm going too far into detail. But I have frequent nightmares about adopting cats just impulsively and then them throwing off my routine because I have one cat and that alone throws me off very regularly. Like just last night he jumped onto us like we were human launch pad and it really hurt, and it was like past midnight, and we usually go to bed at 11ish, so at that point it's a bit much. We couldn't sleep for another hour or something. So yeah, I totally understand what you mean, but the feeling of petting them is just it's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not for everybody, but yeah, we didn't have them for a long time, pets in our growing up. I had pets, but that's my parents for the most part were taking care of them. And I didn't have pets until I was, after I got married and quite settled and everything, and volunteering at the shelters, like, okay, now it's time. And they are an anchor, no question, right? So it is more difficult to pick up and just go away for the weekend or something. You've got to make sure your animals are taken care of. But I mean, the amount of time that we spent watching them and they're playing or whatever funny things they're doing rather than watching TV, for example, it just feels like a much more productive activity than watching television. We're just kind of watching the animals play and they just love us so much. It's like, it's the best.
I know, and it's really cute that they all have their little personable quirks. Yeah, love animals as well. But thank you so much, Audrey, for joining us today, spending your time with us, and for sharing your expertise. If our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
Yeah, sure. So I think the best place is probably my lab's website where we have all of our publications, or most of them, or links to them. Some other information, like some videos that of lectures I've given about some of these topics, maybe in more depth. They're there too. So they could probably the easiest thing to do is just Google UT Austin, which is where I am, University of Texas in Austin, Memory and Aging Lab. And that's my lab.
Amazing. We'll link this in the show notes. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode. You have been listening to Aging Less, the Longevity Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website at longevity.lifemanagementsciencelabs.com, where you can join our movement. I'm Marie Stella. Thanks for tuning in.